The White House is now confirming that President Trump was involved in drafting a statement about his son's meeting with a Russian lawyer. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said yesterday that the president was trying to help his son the way any father would. Mr. Trump's attorney had previously denied that he had any involvement, and the initial statement, which said the meeting was primarily about the adoption of Russian children, was later found to be misleading. Our Major Garrett is following the very latest from the White House.
He certainly didn't dictate. But,
White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders acknowledged President Trump played a role in framing the July 8th statement in which his son, Donald Trump Jr., inaccurately described a June 2016 meeting with a Russian lawyer.
The statement that Don Jr. issued is true. There's no inaccuracy in the statement. The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had.
The president's attorney, Jay Sekulow, had no comment on that, but the White House admission contradicted his earlier claims that Mr. Trump was not involved.
This was Donald Trump Jr. and his lawyers put together a statement serving the interests of their client. So I understand what they did, and it was not the president was not involved in that.
Trump Jr.'s statement said the meeting with the Russians, quote, primarily discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children.
As you can see from the emails, the pretext of the meeting was, hey, we have information, and there was, some small ties. I don't even remember what it was. It just was sort of nonsensical, inane and garbled.
But Trump Jr.'s email showed the meeting occurred after politically damaging information on Hillary Clinton was offered. South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham said misleading statements only cause investigators to look further.
So if you want these investigations to come to an end, the last thing you need to do is reinforce the narrative if you're not candid and honest about what happened.
President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who also was at the meeting with the Russian lawyer, denied collusion with the Russians, saying the campaign was too disorganized. He joked with congressional interns Monday, saying, "We barely could collude with our field offices in different states."
And Major Garrett joins me now from the White House. So, Major, the White House, as we heard, is now confirming that President Trump had some level of involvement. He weighed in on the situation in terms of that initial statement from Donald Trump Jr. Weighed in, who knows what that means, but what are the implications of this development?
Well, the president's attorneys state unequivocally that there are no legal implications, that there is no crime or suggestion of a crime or obstruction of justice. It's just an inaccurate statement, and people can make inaccurate statements even on behalf of the White House. It's happened before. And weighed in is really just semantics. The question was, did President Trump play a role in this initial and inaccurate statement, yes or no? We know now the answer is yes, even though the president's own attorney twice in public said the president didn't. And that contradiction creates tension, quite obviously, between the White House, the president, and his legal team, because clearly they are not communicating. And everyone associated with this story here at the White House concedes these two quite obvious points. This evolving story is a political problem because Republicans in Congress still can't figure out what the bottom of this story is, and ever-evolving stories make that all the more difficult. Two, evolving stories deepen suspicions about what this Russia investigation will yield ultimately, because if in fact it was about nothing, many in the legal and political community assume that by this point the White House would have gotten all of its stories straight, and the fact that it can't or won't deepens suspicions.
So, Major, did I hear you correctly when you said the White House is saying or acknowledging that the initial statement might have been inaccurate? Because we know we just heard from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and she said there was no inaccuracy. Clearly, the subject line of that email chain was not Russian adoptions. It was something very different. So what do you make of her characterization?
Well, this is something that the Trump White House does with frequency. Even if something it has said is later proven to be false, it will defend the original false statement by saying, well, that was true then based on what we knew then, even when their own knowledge was being withheld from the public, which is what led to the inaccuracy in the first place. That's happened on many instances involving personnel, policy, and other matters. That's just one of the many peculiarities of the Trump White House. It will say things that are then proven to be, if not 100% false, largely false, but defend the original statement based on what was known at the time or their own characterization at the time, oftentimes forgetting that characterization was designed to be less than candid in the first place.
I think I need a flow chart for that. To follow along. Geez. Okay, so before I let you go, Major, I want to play something for you from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, what he said about that Russian sanctions bill. We are still waiting for the president's signature. And let's listen to what the Secretary of State had to say, and then we'll talk on the other side.
The action by the Congress to put these sanctions in place and the way they did, neither the president nor I are very happy about that. We were clear that we didn't think it was going to be helpful to our efforts, but that's the decision they made. They made it in a very overwhelming way. I think the president accepts that, and all indications are he will sign that bill.
All right, so what do you make of that statement? How should I interpret that? And what is the holdup on signing this bill? How long does it take to sign a bill? We've seen him sign a lot of documents.
Sure. The public explanation for the holdup in signing this Russia, Iran, North Korea sanctions legislation is it's being legally reviewed. Well, that legal review is happening after the White House has publicly stated the president will sign the bill. So that's essentially just a placeholder. That can't be the actual explanation because no White House would go through a legal process after the fact. It's already announced it would sign any piece of legislation. What's going on here is the White House is getting some blowback from some of our European allies about some of the fears that they have, Germany chief among them, about some of the downstream effects of these sanctions. But as Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, noted, the margins of passage in the Senate and House were so overwhelming, hardly any objections at all, that if the president were to veto this, he would be swiftly and conspicuously overridden. That's how large the majorities are in the House and Senate. So the president doesn't have a choice. This is going to become law, but he may not sign it. The White House has had this legislation since Friday. It can become law without the president's signature, but there is this reluctance to sign the legislation because the White House is still uncomfortable with it, knows it's in a box, knows politically it can't veto this and have that veto sustained. So it's essentially just playing a game of holding pattern until a decision is made. My guess is that'll be sooner rather than later. I would not expect a signing ceremony for this particular piece of legislation.
No cameras in the Oval Office for this one?
Probably not.
Major Garrett at the White House. Thank you so much, Major.
Thanks.